Now, to be fair, especially the more recent sculpts, Games Workshop is normally pretty good when it comes to the lack of prep work it needs to get it ready to go, especially for a basic out-of-the-box model. Which is why I was so surprised when it came to building the new Squig Hog boys and the knob on the Smasha Squig. The fitting in places was lousy, and it would leave some really obvious joint lines, which you'll see really easily once you've painted it. Now, to my mind, if you can spend that much time and effort painting it, you want a good result in the first place, yeah? So has Games Workshop made a lousy product? No, the sculpt is still beautiful. Does it require a lot of prep work to get a good result? Yeah, a fair bit, but that adds to the fun, doesn't it? So, how do I go from this to this and being ready to paint? Let's find out. Okay, let's get cracking. So one thing you've probably spotted already is that I have primed everything on the sprue. Now normally I wouldn't do this, but for the really simple reason being is that on camera you can see what I'm doing and where I'm filing and everything else a bit easier. So after cutting all the pieces out of the sprue using a pair of sharp side cutters. Now using a sharp pair of side cutters is important. It means you get a nice clean cut, and also because you're cutting the plastic rather than crushing it, you will get less stress marks on the surface of the plastic. The second thing is start to file down some of the more obvious sort of nub marks from where you've cut it out. I'm not going to put it right down to the surface, because when working on two separate halves, if you sand away more than on one side than the other, you're causing yourself a problem. Get rid of the worst of it, and then I'll put it together, and then I'll finish the job. So there's tons of different glue options you can use here. Today I'm using the Revel Contactor Professional, which has a nice needle applicator, but I've done a video on different glue types and what they're used for, so you can check that out another time. So with this glue I can put it on one side of the two halves, and it still has working time to faff about and get in the right place. Press it together and hold it for a few seconds, and jobs are good. So now I've got the two halves together, I can now go back and sand down any ridges or nub marks or any mould lines, and work your way methodically around the model. Now one thing I love about these particular sanding blocks is that because they're slightly squidgy. So as I work down the spine of this squig, I can put the sanding block on an angle and almost squash it into the contour I want it to sand down. So therefore I can try and get the lumps and bumps and ridges that are along on the back of the squig without losing that detail. Of course it's not going to work for particularly fine detail, but it's good for this job. This block is from a sanding and buffing set, which is mainly used for much bigger models like Gundam and that sort of thing. So sanding will give you a rougher surface. So with this block I can now buff it back up again to make it look like nice smooth plastic. And working my way around the model, it's not looking too bad right now. There's going to be some big joint lines around there, but no big deal, we can work on that. So having dry fitted the head onto the rest of the body, I've seen a lot worse, especially on scale models, but it's still going to show up like crazy once you've painted it. And little hairline cracks you can sometimes fill with paint, you're not going to get away with that on this one. Now this entire model has a single point of contact with the base, it's this foot. And looking at it, is that going to hold it? Now I did think about putting a pin through to support it and give it a bit extra strength. But having played with it, fair play to Games Workshop, this is really nicely engineered. And the weight of the model, the force, is actually going to lock it in tighter. So yeah, that's quite a good design. I like that. It's quite difficult to see on camera here, but there's a great big gap and line coming down the belly of the squig. Also across the front of the face, and that's going to be quite visible. And even more so across the top of the neck as well. But the biggest bit, the bit that's really bugging me right now, is right around the head and the jawline here. There's a great big gap in there. And also around that leg as well. Right, so let's grab some tools to help us fix this. So I've got a silicone sculpting tool. Something like milliput is going to be massive overkill on this. Therefore Humbrol model fillet is going to be bang on what we need in this one. When you've seen me use this before, this is quite a fine putty. It's really good for detail work and getting into small spaces. And for little stuff you can just take it straight out of the tube and with the tip of your tool like that. This bit you don't have to be too precise, you're just kind of getting in and forcing it into those gaps. Now one thing of using the putty in the tip of the straight out of the tube is it can be a little bit dry. So if you decant a little bit, you can then kind of mix it up and reconstitute it a little bit. Using the tool, I'm just going to work it into the gaps of where I want it to be. Now the silicone one for this bit is a bit too soft, so I'm going to switch to the stainless steel tool and just going to work it into those gaps around the detail. So now I've filled all the gaps on the squig, I need to let it dry. So start building the boss knob to go on the top. This one is pretty straightforward. Once away, working your way around to get rid of any mould lines. Now you need to be careful when you're cutting some of these parts out. As you can see on the base of his boot, the nub of the sprue goes straight into a piece of detail with the stirrup, with the bit that he's standing on. So just be careful of that and make sure you don't cut that off by mistake. I spent a good 10-15 minutes umming and ahhing about which arm to use. Do I use the robotic arm with the slugger, the pistol, or do I use the arm with the big chopper? Now me being me, I can't always have the same model as is the base model, and I can't resist a little bit of a conversion. Do I cut the hand with the big chopper off of that arm and put that onto the robotic arm? In the end I decided not to. It might be a bit tricky to try and pin in place, therefore it could be a bit weak. Therefore I just decided to simply reposition the arm. Now that's dry, I can go back and start to sand down and pick out. So I'm going to use a round file just to flick away and remove some of the larger lumps of the putty away from some of the detail. And then just using the round file to put back in some of the detail around the rolls of fat around the top of the neck there. Okay, because I've repositioned it, so these particular models, the sockets for these arms have almost a triangular profile. So therefore they fit, and they fit in the position they're designed to be in very nicely, very securely, which is a good design. But me being me, I don't want it to put it in that position, so therefore it's going to cause a gap. So all I do is once I've glued it in place, I'm happy with it, I just fill the gap with a putty, using this stainless steel tool just to force it into the gaps of where I want it to be, and smooth it down, and then yeah, let that dry, sand it down, and job's good. So while I got it here, I'm going to just do the base. So I'm going to do a desert base, which you were seeing before in other models. And I'm just going to use the tools to rough it up and give that desert effect. And also sculpt in some footprints from the tracks of the squig on the base. And also try and add in a little bit of movement as the sand flicks up from the hoof of the squig as he's running. So having primed it in black, then gone over it again with the white ink. So what this does, it then means you can check it to make sure all the repairs you've done and you've not missed any mould lines, because you'll see it at this particular point in time, which you may not do before you primed it. Now if it needs any more work doing, just go back, do any more sanding, any more filling or whatever else you need to do, and job's done. I'm actually quite pleased with this base. Even though it's quite a simple and a flat base, I'm really quite pleased how it looks like the squig is moving over the ground and he's flicking that sand up as he charges forward. Like that. Also now with that priming and that white overspray, you can see that we've got rid of all those horrible joint lines and he's now got the gaps and the shadows where you want to be. Awesome. Right, and I will see you in the next video as we now paint this bad boy.